You don't come close to my feet, useless. I walked into my son's house on Thanksgiving Day carrying a pecan pie I'd baked that morning, and before I could even set it down on the counter, Margaret, my son David's mother-in-law, turned to me in front of 20 guests and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You don't even come close to my feet, useless." The entire dining room went silent. Forks stopped mid-air. My daughter-in-law Jessica stared at her wine glass. David looked at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. And I stood there, 58 years old, holding a pie that suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds, while Margaret smiled at me with her perfectly painted lips and waited for me to break. I didn't break. Not then. But before I tell you what happened next, I need you to do something for me. Leave a comment below and tell me. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have walked out? Would you have said something back? And where are you listening from right now? Because what I'm about to share with you changed everything I thought I knew about family, dignity, and the quiet power of knowing exactly when to stay silent. My name is Linda Hartwell. I'm 58 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon, though I've spent the last 35 years building a life that spans from here to the coast. I don't say that to brag. I say it because context matters. My late husband Thomas and I started a marine supply business in 1991 with a loan, a warehouse lease, and more hope than sense. By the time he passed 4 years ago, we had 3 locations, 42 employees, and contracts with half the fishing fleets in the Pacific Northwest. Thomas left me everything. The business, the properties, the investments, the house on Laurelhurst, all of it. I'm not a housewife who got lucky. I ran operations while he handled sales. I know every invoice, every contract, every employee by name. I worked for this life, and I earned the respect that came with it, or at least I thought I had. David is my only child. He's 34 now, married to Jessica for 6 years, and he works as a regional sales manager for a tech firm in Beaverton. He's a good man, or he was raised to be one. After Thomas died, I watched David grieve hard, but he eventually steadied himself. He got promoted. He and Jessica bought a beautiful Craftsman in Alameda, and I was happy for them. I helped with the down payment, not because they asked, but because that's what mothers do. Jessica and I weren't close, but we were cordial. She was polite, organized, a little distant maybe, but I figured that was just her way. Then Margaret entered the picture. Not literally. She'd always been there, living in Seattle, managing a boutique hotel, always busy, always sending gifts instead of showing up. But about 18 months ago, she moved to Portland. Jessica's father had passed years before, and Margaret decided she wanted to be closer to family. She sold her condo, bought a townhouse in the Pearl District, and suddenly, she was everywhere. At dinners, at birthdays, offering opinions on everything from Jessica's career to David's wardrobe to the way I arranged flowers at Sunday brunch. At first, I tried to be gracious. Margaret was a widow too. I understood loneliness, but Margaret didn't seem lonely. She seemed territorial. She had a way of looking at me like I was a smudge on glass. She'd compliment my outfit, then add, though I suppose at our age, comfort matters more than style. She'd taste my cooking and say, "It's fine, Linda, not everyone has the gift." She spoke to me the way you'd speak to a housekeeper you were about to fire. David noticed. I know he did, but he never said a word. And Jessica started changing. She stopped calling me Mom, started calling me Linda. She'd cancel our coffee dates last minute. When I'd offer to host Sunday dinner, Jessica would say Margaret had already made plans. When I suggested we celebrate David's birthday at my house like we always had, Jessica said they wanted something more intimate this year. Translation, without me. The signs were small at first. A month after Margaret moved here, David asked if he could borrow the keys to the beach house in Cannon Beach. I said, of course. It's a family property. Thomas and I bought it 20 years ago, and David grew up spending summers there. But when I drove out there 2 weeks later to check on some storm damage, I found new locks on the doors. My key didn't work. I called David, confused, and he said, "Oh, yeah, Jessica's mom thought it would be safer to upgrade the locks. She had a locksmith come out. I'll get you a copy of the key." He never did. Then there was the business. I still run Hartwell Marine Supply, though I've been training my operations manager, Rick, to take over more responsibilities. I'm not ready to retire, but I'm also not 25 anymore. David started asking questions about succession planning. At first, I thought he was just being thoughtful, but then he started showing up at the office unannounced, asking Rick about inventory, margins, vendor relationships. Rick pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "Linda, I don't want to overstep, but David's been asking me questions that feel more like an audit than a conversation." I asked David about it. He said he was just trying to understand the business better. I wanted to believe him, but something felt off. The real shift happened 3 months ago. I was at their house for dinner, and Margaret was holding court at the head of the table like she owned the place. She started talking about estate planning, how important it was to protect family assets and make sure the right people have control when the time comes. She looked directly at me when she said it. I smiled and changed the subject, but later, when I was helping Jessica clear dishes, I overheard Margaret in the living room telling David, "Your mother's not getting any younger. You need to make sure everything's in order before she makes a mistake she can't undo." I froze. Jessica saw me standing there and quickly ushered Margaret into the kitchen. But the words stayed with me. "Before she makes a mistake." Like I was a confused old woman who couldn't be trusted with my own life. A week later, David asked me to meet him for lunch. He seemed nervous, kept checking his phone, barely touched his food. Finally, he said, "Mom, I've been thinking. You've been working so hard since Dad died, and I worry about you. Maybe it's time to start thinking about slowing down. Let Rick take over more. Enjoy your life. Travel. You've earned it." I asked him what brought this on. He shrugged, said he just wanted me to be happy. But the way he said it felt rehearsed, like someone had fed him the lines. 2 weeks after that, I got a call from my lawyer, Paul Hendricks. He's been the family attorney for 15 years, handled Thomas's estate, manages all our contracts. He sounded concerned. "Linda, I got a strange call this morning from David. He was asking about power of attorney, asking if there was any way to expedite transferring business assets into a family trust. He said you'd asked him to look into it, but I wanted to confirm with you before I did anything." I hadn't asked David to look into anything. I told Paul I'd call him back. Then I sat in my car in the parking lot of the law office for 20 minutes, trying to make sense of it. David wouldn't do this. David was my son. But the evidence was piling up. The locks, the questions, Margaret's comments, and now this. I started paying attention, really paying attention. I noticed that when I'd text David, Jessica would often be the one to reply. I noticed that Margaret was suddenly very interested in my health, asking intrusive questions about my blood pressure, my sleep, whether I was forgetting things. I noticed that when I mentioned traveling or making plans, Jessica would say, "Oh, maybe we should all sit down and talk about that first." Talk about what? I'm a grown woman. I don't need permission to live my life. Then came Thanksgiving. Jessica insisted on hosting. Margaret would be there, of course, along with Jessica's brother and his wife, a couple of David's colleagues, and some neighbors. I offered to bring my usual dishes, green bean casserole, sweet potato souffle, the pecan pie that Thomas used to say was better than any dessert in any restaurant we'd ever been to. Jessica said, "Sure, Linda, that would be nice," but her tone was flat, like she was humoring me. I arrived at noon. The house smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon. The table was set beautifully. Crystal glasses, linen napkins, Margaret's touch everywhere. She answered the door before Jessica could, looked me up and down and said, "Oh, Linda, you came. How quaint." I ignored it, walked into the kitchen, set the pie down, hugged David, who seemed distracted, already halfway through a beer. I tried to help with the final preparations, but Margaret kept intercepting me, taking things out of my hands, redirecting me like I was a child. No, no, Linda. We've got it under control. Why don't you just relax? Relax. That word again. Dinner was tense from the start. Margaret dominated the conversation, talking about her hotel days, her travels, her opinions on everything from politics to wine pairings. Every time I tried to contribute, she'd talk over me or redirect the conversation. Jessica smiled tightly, refilling glasses. David ate in silence. Then, after the main course, Margaret stood up, tapped her glass with a fork, and said she wanted to make a toast. Everyone looked up, eager for a break in the tension. She smiled, that practiced smile, and said, "I just want to say how grateful I am to be here with family. Real family. The people who show up, who contribute, who build something meaningful together." She looked at Jessica, at David, at her son, at the neighbors. Then she looked at me, and she said, "Some people just take up space. They coast on the work of others, contribute nothing, and expect to be celebrated for it. Linda, you don't even come close to my feet. Useless." The room went silent. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. Jessica's face went red, but she didn't say anything. David stared at his lap like a scolded child. Margaret sat down, still smiling, and took a sip of her wine. I stood up. Slowly. I didn't say a word. I walked into the kitchen, my hands shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I stood at the counter, gripping the edge, breathing, thinking, and then I saw it. My purse, my phone, and the folder. The folder I'd brought with me. The folder I'd been carrying for 2 weeks, ever since Paul called me with more information. The folder I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to open. But now I was sure. I walked back into the dining room. The conversation had resumed, awkward and forced. Margaret was laughing about something. Jessica was clearing plates. David still wasn't looking at me. I set the folder on the table in front of Margaret. She glanced at it, then at me, her smile faltering just slightly. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it," I said. My voice was calm, steady. The voice of a woman who'd run a business for 30 years, who'd negotiated contracts with men twice her size, who'd buried a husband and kept going. Margaret opened the folder. Her face went pale. Jessica leaned over to look, and I watched the color drain from her face too. David finally looked up, confused, and then he saw it, and he understood. Inside the folder were copies of documents, emails, text messages, a recorded conversation, all of it carefully organized, time-stamped, annotated. It was a map of a plan that had started the moment Margaret moved to Portland. A plan that involved convincing David that I was losing my grip, that I needed help, that I should step back from the business and transfer control to him. Temporarily, of course, just until I was feeling better. A plan that would have put Margaret in control, because Jessica would defer to her mother, and David would defer to Jessica, and I would be quietly shuffled aside, declared incompetent, and stripped of everything I'd built. There were emails between Margaret and Jessica discussing how to handle Linda. There were text messages about scheduling meetings with lawyers without telling me. There was a recorded phone call, recorded by Paul with my permission, where David asked him about declaring someone mentally unfit to manage their own affairs. And there was a draft power of attorney document already filled out, with David's name on it, just waiting for my signature. Margaret tried to speak, but nothing came out. Jessica started crying, saying it wasn't what it looked like, that they were just trying to help. David stood up, his face red, saying he didn't know, he didn't understand. Margaret said it was for the best. "For the best?" I said. My voice didn't rise. I didn't need it to. "You tried to take my business, my home, my life. You tried to make me believe I was losing my mind so you could take everything I worked for and hand it to her." I pointed at Margaret. "And you." I looked at David. "You let her. You're my son, and you let her." Margaret found her voice then. She stood up, tried to look indignant. This is absurd. You're paranoid, Linda. You're proving exactly why we were concerned. Sit down, I said, and she did. Because she saw it in my eyes. I wasn't the confused old woman she thought I was. I was the woman who built a company from nothing. I was the woman who survived loss and kept going. I was the woman who'd spent the last 2 months quietly gathering evidence, consulting lawyers, setting up safeguards, and preparing for this exact moment. I turned to the room. 2 weeks ago, I met with Paul Hendricks and restructured everything. The business, the properties, the beach house, the investments. It's all in an irrevocable trust now. David, you're not a beneficiary anymore. You're not in the will. You're not on any of the accounts. And you're not getting the beach house. I've transferred it to a conservation trust. It'll be maintained as a public retreat for widows and widowers who need a place to heal. In Thomas's name. David's face crumbled. Mom, you can't. I already did. It's done. The papers were filed Monday. Jessica was sobbing now, begging me to reconsider, saying they didn't mean it. They were just scared. Margaret was just trying to help. But I wasn't listening. I was looking at Margaret, who'd gone very quiet, very still. You thought I was useless, I said. You thought I was weak. You thought I'd just roll over and let you take what was mine. But here's what you didn't understand. I've been underestimated my whole life, by men who thought I was just Thomas's wife, by competitors who thought I'd fold after he died, by people like you who thought age made me invisible. I'm not invisible. I'm just quiet. And quiet people? We see everything. I picked up the folder, closed it, tucked it under my arm. David, when you're ready to apologize, really apologize, not just to me but to yourself, for what you almost did, you know where to find me. Until then, don't come to my house, don't call me. Don't ask me for anything. I looked at Jessica. And you. I helped you buy this house. I gave you money because I thought you were family. I want it back, all of it. Paul will be in touch with the terms. Margaret tried one last time. You're making a mistake, Linda. You're going to regret this. No, I said. You are. Because starting tomorrow, I'm filing a restraining order against you. You've been harassing me, trying to coerce me, and attempting to defraud me. Paul has everything documented. If you come near me, near my property, or near anyone associated with my business, I'll have you arrested. And trust me, Margaret, I have the resources to make sure it sticks. I walked out. I got in my car, I drove home, and I didn't cry. Not then. I cried later, alone in my house, sitting in the chair where Thomas used to sit, holding the picture of David as a little boy, the one where he's grinning at the camera with his front teeth missing. I cried because I'd lost my son, at least for now. I cried because the family I thought I had wasn't real. I cried because even when you win, sometimes it still feels like losing. But I didn't regret it, not for a second. The next morning, Paul called. He'd heard from Jessica's lawyer. They wanted to negotiate. I told him no negotiations. The terms stand. The money gets repaid, with interest, or I pursue legal action. The restraining order against Margaret was filed that afternoon. By the end of the week, I got a certified letter from David. He didn't apologize. He said I was overreacting. He said I'd destroyed the family. He said he'd never forgive me. I wrote back. One sentence. I didn't destroy this family. I just stopped pretending it existed. That was 4 months ago. I haven't spoken to David since. Jessica repaid the money in installments. Margaret moved back to Seattle, though I heard through mutual acquaintances that her reputation took a hit. Word got around about what she tried to do, and let's just say the Portland social scene isn't kind to people who prey on widows. David and Jessica are still together as far as I know, but I hear things aren't great between them. Turns out, when you build a relationship on manipulation and deceit, it doesn't hold up well under pressure. As for me, I'm fine. Better than fine. The business is thriving. Rick got his promotion, and he's doing a phenomenal job. I've started mentoring other women in the industry, especially widows who suddenly find themselves running companies they didn't expect to run. I've traveled a little, spent 2 weeks in Ireland, walked the cliffs of Moher, drank whiskey in pubs where no one knew my name or my story. I've started painting again, something I gave up years ago when the business got busy. I've learned that peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of boundaries. I still think about David. I wonder if he'll ever understand what he almost did. I wonder if he'll ever look at Margaret and realize she used him. I wonder if he'll ever come back. Part of me hopes he will. Part of me knows that even if he does, things will never be the same. And that's okay. Because I've learned something in these last few months. You don't owe people your dignity just because they're family. You don't owe them your silence just because confrontation is uncomfortable. And you don't owe them forgiveness just because they're sorry, especially when they're not. Margaret tried to humiliate me. She tried to make me feel small, useless, invisible. But here's the thing about people like her. They only have power if you give it to them. The moment I stood up, the moment I walked into that kitchen and came back with that folder, the moment I showed them I wasn't the weak, confused old woman they thought I was, that was the moment I took my power back. Not with shouting, not with drama, but with evidence, with preparation, with the quiet, unshakable certainty that I was right and they were wrong, and I had the receipts to prove it. If you're listening to this, and you're dealing with something similar, if someone in your family is trying to push you out, take control, make you doubt yourself, here's my advice. Document everything. Every conversation, every text, every email, every weird request, every red flag. Talk to a lawyer you trust. Set up safeguards before you need them. Don't wait until you're backed into a corner. And most importantly, don't let anyone make you feel like you're crazy for noticing what's happening. You're not crazy. You're paying attention. And that's the first step to protecting yourself. I'm not telling you to cut people off at the first sign of trouble. I'm not telling you to be paranoid or assume the worst. But I am telling you to trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And if people in your life are more interested in what you have than who you are, you need to ask yourself what that relationship is really worth. This isn't the story I wanted to tell. I wanted to be the grandmother who hosted holidays and baked pies and watched my son's kids grow up, if he ever has them. I wanted to be the woman who aged gracefully, surrounded by family, passing down recipes and wisdom and love. But that's not the hand I was dealt. So instead, I'm the woman who fought back, who set boundaries, who said no, who walked away from a table where she wasn't respected and built a new life where respect wasn't negotiable. And you know what? I'm proud of that. So leave me a comment. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you've been through something similar. Tell me where you're listening from and what you would have done in my place. And if you're someone who's facing this kind of situation right now, if you're feeling small or invisible or scared, please know that you're not alone. You're stronger than you think. You're smarter than they give you credit for. And you have more power than they want you to believe. Margaret wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to prove I didn't come close to her feet. But in the end, she was right. I don't come close to her feet. I'm so far above her, she can't even see me anymore. And that, more than anything, is the victory. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, dignity isn't something someone gives you. It's something you claim. And once you claim it, no one can ever take it away. Not even family. 6 months have passed since that Thanksgiving, and I'm sitting on the deck of the beach house in Cannon Beach, the one I donated to the Conservation Trust, the one that's now a retreat for widows and widowers who need a place to breathe. I come here once a month as a volunteer coordinator, helping new guests settle in, sharing my story when they ask, listening to theirs when they need to tell it. The irony isn't lost on me. The house David thought he'd inherit, the house Margaret wanted to control, is now a sanctuary for people like me. People who've lost their partners and found themselves suddenly vulnerable to family members who saw opportunity instead of grief. Last week, a woman named Patricia arrived. She's 62 from Sacramento, and her daughter and son-in-law tried to convince her to sell her home and move into a senior community so they could manage her finances. Patricia knew something was wrong when they started talking about her like she wasn't in the room. She hired a forensic accountant and discovered they'd been siphoning money from her accounts for 2 years. She pressed charges. They're facing fraud prosecution. And Patricia? She drove up here alone, walked into this house, stood on this deck, and cried for an hour straight. Not because she was sad, because she was free. I sat with her. I told her my story. And she told me something I'll never forget. She said, "The hardest part isn't losing the money or even losing the relationship. It's realizing that people you loved were capable of seeing you as nothing more than an asset to liquidate." That's exactly it. That's the wound that doesn't show up on any legal document or bank statement. The emotional theft. The moment you realize that to them, you weren't a mother, a grandmother, a person with feelings and history and worth. You were just an obstacle between them and what they wanted. I've thought a lot about David in these months. I've gone through every stage: anger, sadness, bargaining, acceptance, and back to anger again. Some days I miss him so much it physically hurts. I see a father and son at the grocery store laughing about something, and I have to leave my cart and walk out before I break down. Other days, I'm so angry I could scream. How dare he? How dare he let that woman into our lives and let her poison everything we built? How dare he look at me, his mother, the woman who sat up with him through every fever, every heartbreak, every failure, and decide I was the problem. Paul tells me I did the right thing. He's seen cases like mine before, he says. And most of them end with the elderly parent losing everything because they couldn't believe their own child would betray them. He's represented families torn apart by inheritance battles, by power plays, by adult children who convince themselves they're helping when really they're just taking. He says what I did, gathering evidence, setting up protections, acting decisively, probably saved my life. Not literally maybe, but the life I'd built, my autonomy, my dignity. Rick, my operations manager who's now effectively running Hartwell Marine Supply, told me something interesting last month. He said David came by the office, unannounced, asked to see me. Rick told him I wasn't there. I was actually in my office with the door closed, but Rick knew better than to let him in. David apparently stood in the parking lot for 20 minutes, just staring at the building. Rick watched him from the window. He said David looked lost, older, like he'd aged 5 years in 6 months. Part of me wanted to go out there. Part of me wanted to run to him, hug him, tell him we could fix this. But I didn't. Because here's what I've learned. You can't fix something when the other person doesn't think it's broken. David still doesn't believe he did anything wrong. I know this because 3 weeks ago, I got a letter from him. Not an apology, an accusation. He wrote that I'd humiliated him in front of his wife's family, that I'd destroyed his marriage. Apparently, Jessica is furious with him for letting me do this to them, as if I'm the villain in their story. He wrote that I'd stolen his inheritance, that the beach house was supposed to be his, that I had no right to give away something that belonged to the family. He wrote that Thomas would be ashamed of me. That last line. That's the one that almost broke me. I sat with that letter for 3 days before I responded. I must have written 15 drafts. Some were angry, some were pleading, some were cold and clinical. In the end, I wrote 3 sentences. Your father would be ashamed of what you tried to do to me. He would be heartbroken that you valued money over your mother, and he would be proud that I had the strength to stop you. I mailed it. I don't know if he read it. I don't know if it mattered. Margaret, as I mentioned, moved back to Seattle, but the story followed her. Apparently, one of the neighbors from Thanksgiving, a man named Robert who works in estate law, was so disturbed by what he witnessed that he started telling people. Not gossiping exactly, but warning other professionals in his network about Margaret's tactics. Word spread. The Portland social circles Margaret had worked so hard to infiltrate closed ranks. Her reputation is ruined here, and from what I hear, Seattle isn't much better. She tried to volunteer at a senior center and was quietly told they didn't need her services. Karma, I suppose, though it doesn't make me feel as satisfied as I thought it would. Jessica repaid the last of the money she owed me 2 weeks ago. She included a note. It said, "I'm sorry for what happened. I didn't know it would go this far. I thought we were helping you. I thought my mom knew what she was doing. I was wrong." It's not enough. It's not even close to enough. But it's something. It's more than David has given me. And I hope, it means Jessica is starting to see Margaret for who she really is. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Jessica and Margaret aren't speaking right now. Jessica apparently confronted her mother, asked her why she pushed so hard, why she had to humiliate me like that. Margaret's response, according to the rumor mill, was that she was trying to secure her daughter's future and that I was in the way. In the way. Of what? Of a fortune that wasn't theirs? Of a life that I built with my own hands? I think what disturbs me most is how easily it could have worked. If I'd been less observant, less willing to trust my instincts, less financially literate, if I'd been the woman Margaret assumed I was, confused and passive and grateful for help, I'd be sitting in some apartment right now, stripped of my business, my assets, my autonomy, wondering how I lost everything. David would own Hartwell Marine Supply. Margaret would be whispering in Jessica's ear about every decision. And I'd be the cautionary tale nobody tells because the family would have hidden it too well. That's what haunts me. Not what happened, but what almost happened. I've started speaking at local community centers about elder financial abuse. Paul connected me with a nonprofit that educates seniors about protecting themselves from predatory family members. It's more common than people think. Adult children who convince their parents to sign over power of attorney just in case. Daughters-in-law who suggest selling the family home because it's too much work for you. Relatives who show up the moment a spouse dies and start asking about the will. It's an epidemic, and it thrives on silence, on shame, on the belief that family would never hurt you. I tell them what I learned. Family can hurt you. Sometimes they hurt you the most because they know exactly where you're vulnerable. And the worst part is, they often convince themselves they're doing it for your own good. They rewrite the narrative in their heads until they're the heroes and you're the obstacle. Margaret genuinely believed she was helping Jessica. David genuinely believed I needed to slow down and let him handle things. They built a story where I was the problem and they were the solution. And if I hadn't stopped them, that story would have become reality. At these talks, people ask me if I regret what I did, if I wish I'd handled it differently, if I miss David. The answer is yes to the last one, and no to the first two. I miss my son every single day. I miss the boy he was, the man I thought he'd become. But I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret setting boundaries. And I don't regret showing them that I wasn't as helpless as they assumed. One woman at a talk last month asked me, "But don't you think you were too harsh? Cutting him out completely? He's still your son." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "If your son stole your car, would you give him the keys again just because he's your son? If your daughter forged your signature on a loan, would you co-sign her next one just because she's your daughter?" Love doesn't mean letting people destroy you. It means having enough respect for yourself and for them to say, "This is unacceptable, and there will be consequences." The room was quiet after that. But later, 3 women came up to me privately. Each one told me a story. A son who'd taken out credit cards in her name, a daughter who'd moved into her house and refused to leave, a grandson who'd stolen jewelry and sold it. All of them had stayed silent because he's family, or she didn't mean it, or it would break his heart if I confronted him. All of them were still being victimized. And all of them, after hearing my story, were ready to get help. That's why I keep telling it. Not because I'm proud of what happened, not because I want sympathy or praise, but because someone out there needs to hear that it's okay to fight back. It's okay to say no. It's okay to protect yourself, even from family. Especially from family. I've also started painting again. I mentioned that before, but it's become something more than a hobby. I set up a small studio in what used to be Thomas's office, the room I couldn't enter for a year after he died because it hurt too much. Now it's full of light and color and half-finished canvases. I paint the ocean mostly, the way it looks from the beach house deck at dawn, the way the fog rolls in and makes everything soft and mysterious, the way the waves just keep coming, relentless and patient, reshaping the shore one grain of sand at a time. That's what healing feels like, not a sudden transformation, just persistent, incremental change. Some days the tide comes in and you feel like you're drowning. Other days it recedes and you can breathe again, but it keeps moving. It doesn't stop. And eventually, you realize you're not the same person you were 6 months ago, or a year ago, or the day you walked out of that Thanksgiving dinner. I'm not the same Linda who walked into David's house carrying a pecan pie. That Linda wanted to be liked, wanted to keep the peace, wanted to believe that love was enough. This Linda knows better. This Linda knows that love without respect is just another word for exploitation. This Linda knows that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their choices. Do I hope David comes back? Yes. Do I think he will? I don't know. And I'm learning to be okay with that uncertainty. I'm learning that I can love someone and still not allow them in my life. I can wish them well and still maintain my boundaries. I can hope for reconciliation and still refuse to compromise my dignity while I wait. Last week, I got an email from Jessica. Just one line. I'm in therapy. I'm starting to understand things I didn't see before. I'm sorry it took so long. I haven't responded yet. I'm not sure what to say. Part of me wants to forgive her, welcome her back, rebuild something. Another part of me remembers her sitting at that table, silent, while her mother called me useless. Both parts are true. Both parts matter. And I'm learning that I don't have to choose one or the other right now. I can sit with the contradiction. I can wait until I'm ready. And if I'm never ready, that's okay too. The beach house is full this weekend. 8 guests, all widows, all dealing with family complications. Tomorrow night, we're having a group dinner. Nothing fancy. Just pasta and wine and conversation. Stories shared among strangers who understand. There's a woman from Montana whose brother tried to force her into selling her ranch. A woman from Arizona whose in-laws are suing her for a share of her late husband's life insurance. A woman from Vancouver whose son stopped speaking to her when she refused to fund his 3rd failed business venture. We're all here. We all survived. And we're all learning the same lesson. You teach people how to treat you. And sometimes, teaching them requires walking away. I think about Margaret's words every day. You don't even come close to my feet, useless. I think about the silence that followed. The way everyone looked away. The way I felt in that moment. Small, humiliated, powerless. And then, I think about what happened next. The folder, the evidence, the quiet, devastating dismantling of their plan. The look on Margaret's face when she realized she'd underestimated me. She was right in a way. I don't come close to her feet. I'm nowhere near her feet. I'm standing on solid ground she'll never reach, built on honesty and hard work and self-respect. She's down there, scrambling for social standing she'll never regain, trying to justify actions she can't defend. And I'm up here, free, strong, whole. That's the real ending, not the legal victories or the money repaid or the restraining order. The real ending is me, sitting on this deck, watching the sun set over the Pacific, knowing that I fought for myself when no one else would, knowing that I chose dignity over comfort, knowing that I'm okay, more than okay. And if David ever comes back, really comes back, with genuine remorse and understanding, I'll be here, not waiting, not hoping, just living. And if he doesn't, I'll still be here, living, thriving, teaching other women that they don't have to accept crumbs from people who should be offering them feasts. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Thank you for listening. And if you're going through something similar right now, please hear me. You are not alone. You are not overreacting. You are not the villain. And you have more strength than you know. Use it. Protect yourself. And remember, the people who truly love you will never ask you to diminish yourself for their comfort. The sun is setting now. The ocean is turning gold. And I'm still here. Still standing. Still me. That's enough. That's everything.